I'm Chris Gonsick, and this is Chasing Evil. Welcome to part 2 of what started as a missing child search for 17-year-old Valerie Tyndall in Rush County, Indiana. In part 1, the Rush County sheriffs launched an extensive investigation for Valerie and used every technical means at their disposal to find her. Phone records, traffic cameras, car trackers, and social media posts, to name a few. Surely, Valerie couldn't drop off the grid without some help. Valerie worked for respected business owner, family friend, and neighbor, Patrick Scott. The landscaping owner wanted to help police and was happy to answer questions and provide whatever insight he thought could be helpful to the case. As the sheriffs continued their investigation, it seemed that all roads were leading back to Patrick Scott. At first, Rush County detectives thought Patrick was withholding information, that he either helped Valerie run away or he knew where she was located. Slowly, Rush County, and now the U.S. Marshals, suspected Patrick Scott may be solely responsible for Valerie's disappearance and feared he may have killed her. However, without a body or a motive, law enforcement desperately searched for evidence that would confirm one of their theories. With a search warrant in hand, we'll join the investigation as Detectives Randy Meek and Sean Smallwood of the Rush County Sheriff's Office and Senior Inspector Tom Abreu of the U.S. Marshal's Office proceed to search Patrick Scott's residence.
Patrick's house is interesting. So it's a single-family structure, but when you enter his house, there's a room. Now, it had been searched during the initial search when they were looking for the keys, but it's locked and no one has access to it except Patrick. It's a very small room. And inside of that room, he has a TV, and on the TV is his series of security cameras. He has a lot of security cameras around his property. And I remember one of the first questions I asked Randy when I got on the investigation was, is he a tech-savvy guy? And I think their answer was initially no.
Right.
He doesn't appear to be. As this investigation progressed, we found that that was not the case. So when you enter this room, there were 2 computers, the TV with the cameras displayed on there, and then just a bunch of stuff. He had a locked cabinet, a gun safe, and then just piles of documents, receipts, CDs, and then he had like collectibles in there, I think, too.
They had a whole bunch of NASCAR stuff.
A bunch of NASCAR stuff in there. And you could tell, I mean, it wasn't a room that was cleaned very often. There were certain areas of the room that were just covered in layers of dust where things had never been touched, which benefited us a little bit because we could tell that that probably did not pertain to our investigation because nobody had gone through it in a while. But we had him unlock the room and told him that any electronics in there we were going to seize. He would get them back, but we would have them for a while. And so initially we took the 2 laptops that were there, and we proceeded to look through his cabinets and drawers to see if there was any other electronic devices that we may want to take.
Right.
And one thing we came across were numerous cell phone boxes. So he had the boxes of cell phones, but no cell phones in them. We found numerous SIM cards. We found a SIM card GPS tracker. It didn't have a SIM card in it, wasn't active. But we found that, and that started to kind of make us think maybe he's more tech savvy than we were first thinking.
Yeah.
And as we're going through everything in there, we start to kind of get an idea for who Patrick is. He's a very meticulous individual. He has all his receipts organized by date. He's got lists of just all kinds of things. He's got lists of people.
He put those were in alphabetical order.
Alphabetical order, people that he mows for.
Right.
Everything was cataloged, and it's handwritten or printed out documents. So we were searching through drawers and opening boxes that he had. Underneath his desk, kind of pushed off into a corner, was a box, just a plastic box that was zip-tied shut. So we opened that box, and the first thing on top of there was a framed photo of Valerie sleeping in his car. She was asleep in the passenger seat is what it looked like.
Right.
But it was a framed photo of her, locked in this box. And then next to that was what appeared to be a drawing, a cartoon drawing that Valerie had drawn for Patrick.
Right.
Also in there. And we ended up finding other photos. One of them was a photo of them at the Newport Aquarium, just the 2 of them. And so that stood out to us, right? Why is there a locked, sealed box with what looks like a bunch of relationship items, maybe
Right.
photos of the two of them, drawings. I think there were maybe some letters in there. So that stood out as very strange. Why is there a framed photo in here?
Right.
And so that kind of alluded to this relationship that we had initially thought that they were involved in. Then we started kind of looking through. I think we looked through the gun safe. There's nothing in there. We looked through his filing cabinet. So at this point in the investigation, we realized he's got a lot of devices, numerous devices.
Right.
We were in there for a few hours, kind of looking through, make sure there wasn't anything that we missed. And as we were leaving, we decided to just have a conversation with him and just kind of talk to him, see what his thoughts on all this were.
Right.
And I had never spoken to Patrick Scott. I had reviewed the body cam footage,
Right.
reviewed the interviews. I'd looked at the data that they had on him, but I'd never spoken to him.
Right.
So I decided, I kind of, again, I want to get to know who Patrick is.
Right.
So we just start kind of talking. We started talking about just his life in general, his lawn mowing business. Eventually the conversation turns and we start talking about Valerie and what he thinks may have happened. And I tell him, I'm just trying to get a clear picture of June 7th. And I asked him, when was the last time you saw her?
Right.
And again, he's doing this thing that he does where, you ask him a hard question, he needs a minute,
Right.
so you have to repeat it. And he's kind of giving half answers. So I ask him, when's the last time that he saw her? He goes, that day. I go, okay, but where? And he goes, in the car. I was like, okay, well, you were in the car with her. You're driving. Inevitably, she's somewhere. Where was that? Where was the last place that you saw her? And you can tell because I'm kind of spitfiring these questions at him too quickly for him
Right.
to process.
Right.
And you can tell he's kind of getting flustered trying to come up with a lie quickly.
Right.
And he can't remember. At this point, it's been months. He can't remember what he's told detectives. And so when I ask him, she was in the car with you. Where was the last place you saw her? Mind you, we're standing in his driveway, and he goes, here. And I look at him and goes, she was here at your house. And he goes, yeah, I brought her back here.
Right.
So now we've caught him in another lie. And he's admitted now that he didn't drop her off in Homer, but instead brought her back to his house,
Right.
which is huge. Because now we are for sure, we know the last place that she was alive was at his house.
When he knew he had messed up too.
Yeah,
Right when
you
he
could
said
see it on his face.
You could tell that he's like, oh, that's not what I said prior.
Yeah, and there was a bit of a silence there
Right.
and then he kind of realized it. And then Randy kind of interjected and goes, that's not what you told us before. Randy said to him, why do you keep lying? Are you just trying to help her? And he said, yeah. So then we get into, okay, so she's at your house. When did she leave your house? He said, I don't know. So we decided, look, explain second by second what happened. You drop her off here. He goes, yeah, I dropped her off, but then I had to go pick up my trailer because it was at the shop. So he dropped her off, then drove back to Shelbyville, according to him, left her at his house. He said that she was going to get picked up by somebody. So I asked her, was she texting this person? He said, yeah. So she had her phone here. He said, yeah. So he begins to tell us the story of the day. And what he says is he drops Valerie off at his house because she's going to meet somebody. He then leaves her there, drives back to Shelbyville, gets his truck that had the flatbed trailer on it, brings that back to his house, drops off the trailer or the flatbed,
Right.
then drives back down to Shelbyville to the shop where his trailer was located, picks up his trailer, then comes back to his house. And he said when he left, Valerie was at his house, and sometimes she would just hang out there. When he came back to drop off the flatbed, she was no longer there.
Right.
He said he didn't go into the house, but he didn't see her.
Right.
And then when he came back with the trailer, he went into the house, she wasn't there. So the last place she saw, or Patrick saw Valerie, was at his house waiting for a ride.
And were any of the other family members able to confirm that?
So there were no adults at the house.
Okay.
But that gave us a new place to point this investigation, at Patrick Scott's house.
Right.
So as we're having this conversation outside with him, we start kind of talking about Valerie. Directly behind Patrick's house was another property that had a pond on it. And as we're talking about Valerie, Patrick brings up that the people in the neighborhood believed that he had put her body in that pond, and they wanted to go search it. And Patrick said, go ahead and drain the pond.
Right.
He said, I didn't do anything.
Another person owns that property.
It's
Right.
an adjacent property.
Right.
But that was an odd thing to just volunteer up. We didn't ask him about the pond. We didn't say anything. He just volunteered that information.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we talked to him, that's when we start questioning the timeline where Valerie was. And that's when he starts to tell us that he had brought her back to his house. So we leave there and we send off all of the data to be extracted, all the devices
Right.
off to get the information. We go back to the drawing board basically and start discussing this new information that we've got where we are sure that Patrick brought Valerie back to his house. One of the things we start looking at is that adjacent property.
Did he tell us? Did he just tell us where he had put her?
Right.
That's what we were wondering.
So we start talking about it, and if you look up this property, it's a neighborhood. So there's a large property where this pond is. It's in a big field, and then bordering that property are other houses. So
Got it.
this all happened around, I believe Patrick Scott, based on the GPS data from Live 360, gets back to his house around 12:59. So this is broad daylight. The likelihood that someone is going to drag a body across an open field to get to a pond surrounded by homes
Right.
just didn't seem plausible. But through the course of this investigation, we really wanted to rule out every possible scenario. That's why we put the cadaver dogs on the farm initially where those Snapchat pings were, because we wanted to completely rule it out.
Right.
So we discussed the potential for putting cadaver dogs on that adjacent property. We didn't think she was on that property, but one of the benefits of using a cadaver dog is it's a scent travels. And Patrick's property butted up to this adjacent property.
Right.
And so there was nothing preventing that odor to potentially travel to where we would be at that pond.
Using the property line to our advantage.
Right. So one of the theories that we developed early on, obviously with the interviews and knowing how possessive Patrick had seemed with Valerie, and he always wanted to know where she was, wouldn't allow her to talk to other boys.
Right.
He seemed to be very controlling. And so it seemed like his willingness to cooperate with the investigation was likely because he knew we didn't know where Valerie was. Mm-hmm. And what seemed likely to me is that he could see where she was on a daily basis.
Mm.
So it seemed likely that she was somewhere on his property.
Interesting.
Because he would know that she's still there. Nobody's
Right.
interfering with it. The police aren't there. So he can continue to lie. He can continue to cooperate because everyone's believing his lie.
Right.
So we thought, well, let's rule all this out. If we can put cadaver dogs on the adjacent property and we search the pond area and they have nothing, and if they skirt behind his property and the cadaver dog indicates to his property, we can write another search warrant based on that new information to get us onto his property.
But you couldn't have written a search warrant prior to that to get dogs onto his property?
Again, with search warrants, you have to establish probable cause.
Right.
And so you have to have enough information because basically we are infringing on his rights at that
Right,
point. It's
right.
his property.
Right.
So we would have to show to a judge that we have enough evidence to say it is likely that these canines will find something.
Right.
And at the time, we knew she was there. It seemed likely, based on all the information that we had, that she is not out and about of her own free will.
Right.
It's starting to become more and more likely that she's deceased.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to writing the search warrant to put the dogs on the property initially, we didn't have it wasn't like there was a Google search of it. There was nothing we had retained at that point from any of our searches or any of our computers to say Valerie Tyndall's dead.
Right.
That she's dead and that
Right.
she was murdered. None of that was there yet. Now what we could say is like this doesn't make sense, and we could start piecing this together, which is what we did, but it wasn't a point where we could type that search warrant, where I felt comfortable typing that search warrant to say, we're going to put dogs on with what we currently have. Even though my gut told me that we were probably right, we needed more actual evidence, I guess, before we went that far.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately what we decided was we wanted to search the adjacent property in the pond, but we also wanted to wait until some of that information came back from the devices.
Right.
So then we get the information back, and we decide to start sifting through that. Now, I want to discuss the amount of data that was involved in this case. By the end of the case, with all the search warrants that were written and all the information we had gotten back, we had over a terabyte of data collected. And that's, you're talking photos, messages, emails, documents. So you're talking about millions of files worth of information that has to be parsed through individually. And there are the three of us working this, two detectives from Rushville PD. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of information for a handful of people to parse through. Mm-hmm. So at this point, we've gotten back all the data off the electronic devices that we had submitted. Forensic search was done. Everything that was on that phone or had been stored at any point was removed from the devices, and we were able to look through them. So each investigator started to kind of dig through one of the devices. I think I initially started looking through some of the photos. We were looking through Patrick's main phone. I went immediately to his text messages with Valerie and began to read them from beginning to end.
Right. And what kind of relationship did that indicate?
Well, I was, so with all this data, I was really hoping for a smoking gun.
Right.
Or to get something to really point me in a direction. And I thought for sure we would be able to find the remnants of some kind of sexual relationship between the two of them.
Right.
That's not what I found.
Right.
In fact, if you had removed me from this investigation completely and all you gave me were the text messages between Valerie and Patrick, what I would describe to you is a nice neighbor. A lot of those messages, Valerie would text him and say, I haven't eaten dinner. Can you buy me a pizza?
Not bordering or venturing into obsessive.
No. They would joke back and forth. She would say, I need gas. At one point, I think homecoming was coming up. She wanted to get her hair done and asked if he would help her pay for it or help her get tickets to homecoming. Mm-hmm. He would invite her, say, we're going out to eat. They took trips to Holiday World with the family, his family, Patrick's family, and they would invite Valerie.
It does beg the question whether or not her family would provide the finances that you need.
Sure. And from like the discussions we had with Patrick and some of the texts that we saw on the device, it seemed like either Valerie came home late and there was no dinner, or just for whatever reason, nothing was available, or maybe she didn't want to eat what was there, or whatever it was. But there were a lot of communications, and he would say, I'm leaving it in the truck, the money. So that kind of also showed that like, she wasn't going to knock on the door and he was giving her money. Right. So it seemed like this was still a secret from Patrick's family.
Right.
This help that he was providing.
Right.
But there was nothing in the text messages that clearly laid out, these two are involved in some kind of a relationship. Mm-hmm. And that was one of those times where after I read, every single text message, I sat back and thought, man, are we wrong about this guy?
Right. Interesting. Okay.
Did I think about this? And I think that's just an important part of any investigation is to question your beliefs, right? The evidence is pointing here. I think we did that on numerous occasions where we would take the evidence that we had, completely remove Patrick from the equation and see where we could lay it out. And the thing was, nothing made any sense without Patrick being involved. And so even if we thought, let's take him completely out of the equation,
right?
Where does this evidence take us? And it wouldn't go anywhere without him. He was a pivotal piece of this entire investigation. He was absolutely involved.
On the text messages, he had actually sent messages to her after June 7th, so after she disappears, that said things like, hey, are you okay? Just reach out, let me know you're okay, and things like that after she had already disappeared. So those messages he still sent her, checking on her after the fact.
So mind you, this is the 8th. So Patrick has killed her.
Right.
Has her body stashed and is pretending to text her phone to provide an alibi.
Right.
Those are the messages. So you see on June 7th, Valerie texts Patrick, I'm almost there. Then nothing. And then I believe on the 8th, hey, give me a call. Are you okay? If you're worried about your father, let me know. I can help.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So he's doing these things to kind of lay this foundation that like he's not involved. So much so, like when we got the Life 360 data back and we were able to track his whereabouts that day and the following day, what we found was strange behavior where he was driving around aimlessly almost. And it seemed like he was developing an alibi. So he would stop at certain places and go inside. He stopped to use the bathroom, I think, at a hospital, right?
Interesting.
Stopped, stared at the camera. It was totally out of the norm from a guy who's very organized, doesn't just drive around. Not somebody that he did come to Rushville a lot. That's what we were able to see. But it was clearly that he was driving by areas that had surveillance cameras and stopping in front of that camera to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
And if you overlay all those pin drops from all his GPS locations, I mean, it's just one big blob. But there's this weird little route on the outskirt of that blob, and that was the route he drove the day she went missing.
Right.
So he never drove that route ever again. And so it's very odd. He drives up to one neighborhood, turns around, comes back, drives somewhere else, stops at the hospital, goes to McDonald's. So none of it makes any sense. Something else we got during the course of this investigation through the data that was taken from the devices as well as the Life 360 data, we're able to map out his location the day of Valerie's disappearance and the day after. And there's very interesting information, not only the night she goes missing where he starts driving erratically, turns around, just trying to be seen.
Right.
The next day, like Randy said, we had developed a pattern of life for him of where he mows, what times he mows.
Right.
One thing that we noticed the following day after Valerie's disappears, so on the 8th, early in the morning, he goes to a cemetery, I believe it was in Johnson County. And he usually mows there, but he showed up, I think, around 5 in the morning. So a lot earlier than he would normally show up.
Right.
So his pattern of life remains consistent until the day Valerie disappears. So right around 12:59, everything in his pattern of life changes. And it doesn't start up again until the next day. However, there's that one oddity of his movement where he shows up at that cemetery super early.
About an hour. I think it was an hour earlier than normal.
Huh.
And he's there for a long period of time. Then he leaves, and we're able to watch where he goes, and he goes to a Home Depot away from where he lives. So he passed a Home Depot he was closer to, drove to an adjacent town to go to that Home Depot.
Okay.
So we realized that seemed to be a bit suspicious and out of the norm. He had never been to that Home Depot before.
Right.
So what we did was we got Randy and the Rush County detectives to head up to the Home Depot to see if they could access the surveillance footage and see if he purchased anything.
Interesting.
What they were able to get back was footage of Patrick entering the Home Depot and purchasing 4 2x4x8s and 2 sheets of OSB plywood.
Okay. And for those of us who are not the do-it-yourselfers?
So it doesn't make any sense by itself. However, by looking at that alone, what you see are the necessary materials to build a box.
Okay.
And we all pretty well said it at the same time. We're looking for a box.
As soon as we saw him purchasing the OSB plywood and the 2x4s, there's really nothing that you can do with that but build a box.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure you could add that to some other construction project, but it's very specific building materials being purchased here.
Okay.
And so it just seemed odd that he would travel to a Home Depot away from his normal Home Depot. And he goes to Home Depot all the time. He mows lawns. Right. He needs equipment.
Right.
But that's not the Home Depot he ever goes to.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes to a Home Depot he doesn't frequent and purchases 4 2x4s and 2 sheets of OSB plywood. So immediately we look at that and think this is a box. He's building a box.
Right.
So now that starts leading us in a direction. So at this point we think it's likely he's murdered Valerie, and now he's trying to find a way to dispose of the body.
Mm-hmm.
You build a box, but how do you get rid of a box? Well, he happens to have a covered trailer that you can put multiple lawnmowers in. something that's very easy to put a box into, drive it off somewhere, and dispose of it anywhere.
Right.
And like I said, we've developed the pattern of life. Rush County did surveillance on him. We knew where he went, and he traveled to some very, very remote places conducting his business, right? Very wooded areas, rock quarries,
cemeteries.
a lot of places that aren't frequented by people.
Right.
So really what we noticed at that point is we are now 2-3 months into this investigation. He did everything that he did because, again, after that trip to Home Depot on the 8th, his pattern of life doesn't skip a beat. It goes right back to his lawn mowing business. And every single day, every second, he never deviates again.
Right.
So we decide that everything that happened must have happened in that window from June 7th at 12:59 p.m. to the next morning on June 8th before he goes to the Home Depot.
Right.
If he were to kill her, he had to do it then and dispose of the body then. Now, on June 8th, he gets the building materials to build potentially what is a box. So sometime after June 8th, he could have deviated to dispose of this box. But his schedule is very consistent. He mows the exact same places for the same amount of time, the same days. So it seems unlikely that he would have the time to move a box with potentially human remains in there.
Right.
So we decide that this timeline where everything happened would be early morning on the 8th when he visited that cemetery, all the way back to the following day where we knew she was at his house at 12:59 p.m. That's our window. So we start looking through all the data that we have, start looking through pictures. Like I said, there's no smoking gun. There are no images of her on there other than her with his family.
Well, and we had found that he had deactivated some of his apps too that day. He had shut things off on his phone.
Yep.
So he had done counter surveillance on that as well. And so when we were looking through the timeline on his phone of that day, a lot of the normal apps that he would have used were shut down. However, that's when we caught the Apple Health in the background of his phone.
Yeah.
Which is not something he used. It just was running in the background of his phone. And we were able to see that he had such movement and such activity during that time that it activated Apple Health on his phone, and that occurred at 1:35 p.m. So now we start seeing these spikes in his activity from 1:35 to shortly later. So we were able to say, all right, we've now narrowed the timeline to June 7th. That this happened, we've narrowed it to June 7th between 12:59 p.m. and 1:35 p.m. So we had narrowed our timeline. We had got whatever transpired to a 36-minute timeline, which was crucial for us, and especially in trying to determine, okay, where could he have went from that point with her body.
Interesting, right.
So Randy actually reached out to me, and he had found that Apple Health data and kind of put together a crude drawing of within that amount of time, what is the distance the average person could cover with that many steps? And what we ended up seeing was the pond behind his house came up again. Because based on the Apple Health data and his steps, he could have walked all the way to that pond. So what we ended up doing was reaching out to a geospatial analyst to map out those steps on that terrain and see with those different activity indicators and the steps and the speed he was traveling, they were able to map out rings of a distance that he could have traveled during those activity moments that were picked up by the phone. And again, when you lay it out on a photo, a topographic photo with the house, what you see is multiple rings, and almost all of them encompass the lake or the pond behind his home.
Right.
So at this point, we begin to look back at that conversation we had with him when we took the devices, where he told us, everybody thinks I put her in the pond, go ahead and search it. And we were thinking, did he just tell us does he want to get caught? Did he just tell us this? So without having any other really relevant information from the devices, again, we're still continuing to dig through them. We determined that it's probably necessary at this point to rule out that pond. We end up talking to the homeowner, the property owner, and we get their consent to put cadaver dogs on the property.
Right.
Now, again, the property butts up to Patrick Scott's property. The day that we end up conducting the search, there's not a lot of wind. There's not the worry that it's going to draw scent from really far away.
Right.
And we decide we don't think that there's a body in that pond. Again, like we discussed, it would be very odd for someone to decide to carry a body, to drag a body at least 100 meters in an open field where there are numerous houses into a pond.
Right.
But it gives us access to a property adjacent to Patrick's, where if the cadaver dogs indicate towards his property, then maybe that's enough to get us to his property to put the cadaver dogs on.
Right. And at that point, you didn't feel like you had enough to just directly get onto Patrick's property?
That's a very invasive search.
Right.
And so in order to be sure, we wanted to pad that search warrant with as much evidence as possible.
Again, we had still no smoking gun that Valerie was dead.
Right.
Right.
Again, we're just going on the assumption that because she's been gone for so long, no one's talked to her. It's completely out of the norm.
Right.
This is a likely scenario.
Right.
We're still pursuing every scenario,
right,
but this seems to be the most likely.
Check. Okay. So at this point, I want to bring in Tony Weaver. Tony is an Indianapolis PD detective with the Missing Persons Unit and canine handler extraordinaire. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you. Welcome.
So let's talk about the canines. How much training do they have to go through to become a cadaver dog? I mean, how good do they have to be before they get this assignment?
It's extensive training that we go through. The main reason why is one of the things you don't want is to give a false indication when there's absolutely nothing there.
And how often do they indicate on something that doesn't turn out to be a cadaver? How often are they wrong?
When they're trained properly, not very many times. That's one of the things you definitely want to train up for so that that's not occurring.
So if they indicate, there's a very, very high probability that they've got something.
Yes.
So talk about a canine's nose, for instance. How sensitive is their nose?
Their noses are absolutely incredible. The gift that God gave them to be able to do what they do is amazing, and we still don't use it to its full capacity. A dog's nose, if this makes sense, has about 300 million olfactory receptors compared to humans that only have about 6. Their noses are literally, they're anywhere, you hear numbers from 10,000 to 100,000 times stronger than ours. And then their brain, the part that is used to detect odor, is 40 times larger than ours as humans.
Wow. That's almost unfathomable, but it does make sense as to why my dog can be on the other side of the house, upstairs, doors closed, and if I take out a piece of cheese,
she knows it.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's a great example. 1 drop of liquid in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools can be detected by a dog.
Does that dissipate pretty quickly, like they can get it if it's just dropped into the water, or does it dissipate over time and you only have a certain amount of time to detect that?
It will dissipate over time, but in water, it tends to, the odor will last longer because water is more dense than air. So the water will last longer in the water than it will in air.
Okay. So we're at the pond.
Yes.
And Randy, Tom, you're positive you're going to bring some dogs by and you're going to get a hit.
Patrick himself had brought up the pond when we had talked to him previously, and we thought there's a possibility he could have maybe disposed of something there, some evidence or something, but really we wanted the dogs in proximity to his property, hoping the dog would indicate and want to move onto his property. Then we could write a search warrant for his property, move the dogs over there, and then get a hit. Those of us investigating it, we really thought her body would be in that pond directly behind his house. Mm-hmm. So this was a fairly large property. You can think of the property kind of in a square shape. Along the perimeter of that square were other houses. Patrick's house was on the southwest corner of the property where the pond was. The pond was centrally located on that property.
So it was in the middle.
It was in the middle. And
okay.
So the pond would have been about 50 or so meters.
By the way, for those of us who weren't in the military, we don't do meters. We don't do clicks. Talk to us in feet, please. Okay. Feet and yards and things that we can understand.
Okay. So from the southwest corner where Patrick Scott's property was, I'd say probably about 150, 200 feet.
Okay.
From Patrick Scott's property line was the beginning of the pond, where the pond started.
Okay, so this is a big moment. The scene is now Tony's, and it is time for him to rip this case wide open. So Tony, tell us exactly how does it work with the canines?
Well, when we got to this scene, Randy had explained that he wanted us to go along the property line of Patrick Scott to see if the dogs would show any indication or provide us body language to show us that we needed to move onto Patrick Scott's property to
Okay.
go into search.
Uh-huh.
All right, so I brought Lillian Hardy with me, which is the chief canine officer from Homeland Security. And she had 2 dogs herself and one that she was training that she brought with her. And I brought my canine Bailey to the scene to be able to check. So we had 4 dogs that would be able to check the area, and we could make our decisions based on the decisions of the dogs.
And is that more for redundancy purposes that you're going to be checking the same area with different dogs?
Well, we want to just make sure that if we're getting indications from all dogs versus primarily like maybe only one, it might matter how we proceed from there.
Okay. Who's up first?
Okay, Lillian took Eris, is her dog's name. She took Eris along the fence line, along the property line of Patrick Scott, working that area and not getting any body language, any reaction from her dog whatsoever as far as odor.
And this is the most experienced canine that you brought with
That's
you?
why we started with her. I've literally watched her be drawn to odor and show body language and indicate from hundreds of yards away from where the body was.
Wow.
And so I definitely wanted her to go first because her dog had a lot more experience at this point of being able to detect odor from a distance,
Right.
which is what we were trying to do in this case versus my 2-year-old at the time.
Okay. So she goes away, and it's interesting. When we were talking earlier, you had said you don't want the other dogs to see what one of the dogs is doing. Does that really make a difference that they're watching and they're going, well, I'm not going to do what that dog just did?
You know, I questioned the same thing until I saw it in practice where a dog was not doing what it was supposed to do. I thought it was playtime. And I watched the handler put the dog up and make the dog watch him work somebody else. And when that dog saw somebody else, I don't know if it's a jealousy thing that kicked in,
Uh-huh.
but the dog instantly went to work.
Okay.
It makes a difference.
Okay. Excellent.
So she searched that area, got no reaction whatsoever.
Right. Right.
But then Eris was pulled, and when I mean pulled, she went straight to the pond. She left that bordering property of Patrick Scott's.
So she is pulling away from Patrick Scott's property.
Correct.
And
Correct.
that is not something that you expected.
That's not what we were looking for at that point.
At the beginning of that day, I would have put money that we were going to get indication on Patrick Scott's property. I was certain that either her body was there or there would be evidence that the dog could be able to hit on decomposing remains or something that happened there that the dog would be able to pull towards. So as soon as that dog began pulling the opposite direction, at that point, I kind of thought, well, everything I've thought to this point is now done. We have to start another direction because I have no idea what we're going to do now.
Right. Okay. And Tony, what did Eris do?
She indicated on that north side of the pond, indicating that she was in odor, smelling decomp.
Completely unexpected. You're happy, but you're puzzled?
Correct.
Okay, so she indicates, so what's the next thing that you do to kind of further substantiate that you may have a positive hit?
That's when I got Bailey out of the vehicle, but for the next search. And Bailey was off leash, and I began walking her that direction. And she didn't go towards Patrick's property at all. She went straight to the pond and went to that straight to the northeast corner where the same place where Eris had indicated. And I had her get closer, and she ended up working her way clear to the water and indicating on the water itself and indicating again.
Okay, so now you have 2 positive indications, 2 hits.
Correct.
So it's looking more and more likely. Do you bring the other 2 dogs and do the same thing?
Yes. Lillian got her dog Pie out, and Pie, again, went to the pond, same area, and indicated.
So you have 4 dogs indicate on the same spot. In your experience, the likelihood of there being something there is 100%?
Oh, yeah. There's definitely odor there.
Randy, Tom, Sean, what is your next move now that you've been a little bit surprised by these turn of events?
Well, I think to hammer home how impressive this was, so this pond had overgrown. The weeds around this pond were 6 to 8 feet tall that these dogs had went through to get down into the water.
Uh-huh.
Our belief is that she's in the pond, and we had consent on the property from the property owner. She was great to deal with. However, under all the circumstances and understanding the evidence collection and process we were going to take, we went ahead and paused and typed another search warrant to put divers into that pond. Indiana State Police dive team was available.
So when a dive team shows up to do a cadaver search, what do they do exactly? How does that work?
They put 2 divers in at a time, and they basically did a grid search. In this circumstance, so what we realized quickly was the pond was not near as deep as we anticipated. And so most of the pond was done on their hands and knees, feeling around for any evidence or any human remains.
You're sitting on pins and needles at this point.
Yes.
And so how long did they search for?
What was a while?
Probably a couple hours, I would guess.
Couple hours. And at some point, they say to you, we're done.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what did they come up with?
Nothing in the pond. Now, this was a physical search, so they put their bodies in there, felt around and stuff. It was not a sonar search at that time, but they felt nothing and gave us no indication any evidence or human remains were in the pond at that point.
That's a head scratcher, to be sure. It makes no sense.
It makes absolutely no sense. And I think they had found a cinder block in there with something tied to it. We had told them to look for any evidence. We thought maybe he had kept the body there. Maybe he had disposed of some evidence there. They came up with absolutely nothing. Once we left the pond, we started thinking about how that scent got there. One of the things I thought about was potentially during some of the heavy rainstorms that we had that season, there was a possibility that some of the rainwater that had initially landed on Patrick Scott's property had run off down this field and collected in the pond. We decided to speak to Tony and kind of try and understand how scent travels along water. If it's possible that if it had rained somewhere, that water could have collected a scent and transported it to the pond. So we decided to reach out to Tony to talk to him and figure out exactly how scent travels and how this works.
So, Tony, how does scent travel?
Scent will travel in either the air or water, either one.
How long do odors hang around? I mean, I get the sense that because of wind or because of other factors, age, I would figure that odors dissipate with age.
And you are correct. And here's an interesting fact with it. If Randy had called us to come out there and search the day after she was buried, we would have had no indication at the pond. That odor would not have gotten there. But because she had time in that box, if you will,
Right.
her body decomposed, and that odor seeped into the ground, seeped into the water, and also went into the air. And that odor was able to travel. We had 6 months of decomposition for that body odor to be able to travel to that pond where the dogs could indicate and pick up that odor.
But after 6 months, it's not in the air anymore, right?
It still would be. It sticks
Really?
to plants. It'll stick to trees. Actually, trees can actually absorb it. That's one of the things when we're looking in woods or anything. Odor will be absorbed by tree or plant roots, and they'll actually pull it into the plant itself, and the dogs can actually taste the plant.
Wow. Okay. So, yeah, I quite frankly never thought about that. But now that you're saying it, of course, it makes sense that the molecules would land somewhere.
Right. And that's where they would remain.
And still give off odor even after it lands on a tree.
One of the questions we get is how old of a body, if there's still a bone there, it's still going to be putting off odor. So they have the ability to be able to search even ancient burial grounds.
I indicated to me a while ago, this blew my mind. You said that they're actually using canines to search for bones in ancient Egypt?
Yes. Yes.
They're still giving off odor.
Yes. If there's something there, it will be providing an odor that the dogs can still recognize.
That's absolutely extraordinary. So, Tom, you've now had an education.
Yes.
Your next move is what?
Well, so this kind of put some new life back into the investigation. The hits on the pond and the failure to find anything in the pond kind of set us back a little bit because we were sure we'd get something that brought us back to Patrick's property. After this conversation, all this information did bring us back to Patrick's property. We could sit there and look from his property line to the pond and see there was a gentle sloping. It was likely that water that landed on Patrick's property would end up accumulating in the pond. But as with any investigation, our belief isn't really going to hold up in court. We need facts. So this caused me to look into finding a detailed map that could prove what we were thinking. So I reached out to Geospatial to do an analysis on the terrain.
Wait, let me just interrupt for a second. The Marshals Service has somebody that you can pick up the phone in geospatial analysis and just get them on the horn?
So we have an analyst that does geospatial analysis that looks into mapping and terrain features and can do this kind of work for us. Yes.
And you utilize her in fugitive hunts and other missing children stuff?
So I had never utilized her before. It was actually new to me at the time that we had access to this.
Right.
It was in speaking with other investigators that I was put on to this as a possibility. Luckily, this happened around the same time that we were looking for it. And I was able to reach out to her and ask her to do a terrain analysis specifically to see if water runoff would go from our suspected location to this pond. And she was able to very quickly put together a map that showed that, in fact, water would travel from Patrick Scott's property and accumulate in this pond on the adjacent property.
And is that enough to get you a search warrant to Patrick Scott's property?
I would say that was the final nail. I think Randy can speak better to this, but I think with everything that we had, this piece of information finally brought all of the other evidence we had collected together and provided the final nail in the coffin to be able to get onto Patrick's property.
Utilizing all that and putting it all together was absolutely enough for a search warrant at that point.
Okay, before we move on to Patrick Scott's property, one question that has been gnawing at me a little bit is, if Valerie is going to be found on Patrick Scott's property, why didn't the dogs indicate closer to his property, since that's where she will be found?
And the reason for that is basically because that is not where the odor was. The odor was traveling through the water through a drainage pipe, we found out later. And so the odor was not coming up through the ground. She was buried several feet deep, and as she would have decomposed, her odor leaked into the ground and took the least path of resistance, which was the water moving, and it flowed with that water into the pond where our dogs could indicate.
The odor stayed submerged.
Yeah, because he buried her more than 6 feet. So, there was
Yes.
a dog standing directly the day we excavated her. Before we started digging, there was a dog standing directly on top of her that could not pick it up. So had there not been drainage, it's very likely she would still be out there wherever she was buried. So we end up getting 2 handlers with 2 dogs each. So 4 separate dogs to come out and do independent searches. Mm-hmm. We kind of wanted them to walk the perimeter at first just to see. And we spoke to the handlers and said, look, this is the property of the person we're looking at. We don't have access to the property. If you could just walk your dogs, just do what you do, see where they indicate. So they parked their vehicles with the dogs out of sight from where the search was being conducted, so that the other dogs wouldn't see what was going on, wouldn't have any idea.
Right.
So they take one dog at a time, and they take the first dog out, and it walks right past Patrick's backyard and doesn't do a thing. Doesn't look over there, doesn't make any indication it has any kind of a scent, and just continues walking and walks off. And the handler's behind it following it. And right there was another one of those moments where it's like, well, there goes that.
Yeah, wrong again.
Wrong again.
Right.
And, like Randy said, there were multiple points in this investigation where we got something and then nothing.
Right.
And so it's been very defeating. So, I didn't want to put all my eggs in one basket, but a lot of my eggs were in that basket, that the dog was going to pick something up on his property. I was certain that either he had killed her there and left her there, or she was still on that property. Mm-hmm. And now I'm sitting there questioning myself. And so I'm sitting there thinking, what's the point of putting these other 3 dogs out? That dog didn't do anything. It's not in the pond. Now, the way this pond was set up, it's a field. In the middle of it is this pond. The pond has like a hill around it, and there's really tall grass all the way around it, so you can't see from one side to the other. Randy gives me a call, and he says, you might want to come over here. This dog just indicated.
On the opposite side of Patrick's house.
Yeah.
It was even further away.
Even further away.
Oh, okay.
At the pond. We're standing by Patrick's house. We move around around the pond, and I see this dog just sitting right next to the pond. Right. And we kind of look at each other in shock because we did not think at all that this pond had anything to do with this investigation. And here's a dog that just indicated. So I think at that point, our gears are turning and we're thinking we have to get in this pond. So we start kind of trying to reach out to see if we can get dive teams to come out this very last minute. We hadn't planned on this at all. And we're making phone calls. The handlers put that dog away and proceed to bring every other dog out individually. And every single dog indicated on the exact same spot of that pond.
Wow.
Four dogs.
Positive hits.
In fact, one dog went into the water and laid down in the water. Now we have 4 independent dogs, cadaver dogs. And these are not new dogs with no experience. These are experienced dogs who have found bodies before and who have found bodies in water. So,
And where the hits are is nowhere near Patrick Scott's property.
So it's, I mean, again, the property is adjacent to his.
But you were hoping if you got a hit, it would be right along the fence line.
Right.
line.
Yeah. I was hoping they would indicate
Right.
something is in his property,
Right,
and
okay.
then we could move that way. That is not what happened.
Right.
I believe the southwest corner of the property was adjacent to Patrick Scott's property. The pond was directly in the center, and the hits were on the north side of the pond. So we end up getting a hold of Indiana State Police and their dive team, and they say that they can come out and swim it. I think we ended up writing a search warrant to cover us to search that pond.
Yeah, we thought it was one of the highs. We thought, well, we've got it now. We typed another search warrant just to make sure we cover all our bases on it. We got a drone out there to fly to get us aerial photos, and
Again, all 4 dogs indicated at the
Right.
exact same point. So we get ISP dive team to come out, and of course at this point you have people converging because now they're seeing something happening and they're watching. So the divers get suited up and hop in this pond. Now, originally I think we were told that the pond was about 22 feet deep at its deepest.
yeah, it's deep. Yeah,
Perfect place. I mean, that's a deep pond.
Right.
I mean they covered the pond. I mean
They covered the entire
yeah.
thing and came up with nothing. You get that high of, we have 4 dogs telling us there is scent of human remains right here.
Right.
The exact same spot. None of the dogs had seen what the other dog had done. Put 4 divers in the pond, and they come up with absolutely nothing.
Wow.
Not a phone, clothes, nothing. So then we're just kind of left there, like now on an old new low.
Thankfully, we had a conversation with the handlers, and they could explain to us more what the dogs could do. The property owners were, again, great. They were willing to, they told us drain the pond. They told us do whatever we needed to do. They were on board to find Valerie. And thankfully, we had talked to the handlers, and the handlers had told us that a couple things. One, wind could be carrying the scent from another location, and it could just be sitting on the water. The water holds odor. And the second thing they told us was it could be from water runoff, which both ended up being super vital to us later. So the handlers ended up becoming a crucial part of this investigation, and that water runoff statement ended up being very crucial to us later in the investigation. But like Tom said, it was another high, and then right back down to low, and we're back to looking at cell phone data and trying to see what we've missed again.
But everything is bringing us back to Patrick Scott's house. And the fact that 4 cadaver dogs hit that close, probably within 300 meters of his front door, there has to be something out there. So we reach back out to Geospatial, and they do a water runoff map for us of the area.
That's pretty high tech.
Yeah, it was
That's wild.
amazing having these resources. I can't remember how many agencies at the end of it assisted with the investigation.
It was over 20.
Yeah. They end up conducting a water runoff map, and they're able to map, based on the terrain features, where water could be running into that pond from. And one of the locations was Patrick Scott's house. So with that, coupled with the information from the handlers saying that obviously water is like a conduit that scent travels along.
Right.
If it's heavy rains, which there had been, they pool up and they begin to drain, they could potentially drain from Patrick Scott's residence pass through the dirt in his property, travel along the adjacent property, and end up in that pond. So there's a high likelihood that the scents of human remains, if they were on that property, could have been transported by that water runoff and could be hanging in that pond area.
Is that enough to give you probable cause?
We all sit down, and that's what we said. That's the first time we have something saying body, that we have 4 cadaver dog hits that are trained specifically in human decomposition, telling us that there is something deceased in that area.
Right.
What we knew at the time was it was not in the pond. So when you look at all of the facts of what we have in this investigation, yes, absolutely. At that point in time, that's where we all the investigators sit down, the 3 of us sitting here, and then Caitlin and Jordan, and went over everything and made the determination that this is the time to type the search warrant for everything.
Now, at this point, like Randy had said, we had worked with multiple agencies throughout this investigation. One of the agencies we were working with was the FBI. They've got a lot of resources at their disposal.
One of the things the FBI was able to provide us was a flyover of Patrick Scott's properties. When we got the results back and we were able to see the photos, there was obvious ground disturbances on Patrick Scott's properties. And when I say ground disturbances, I don't mean that there was a crater, the size of a house or something like that, but there was obvious areas that digging and different stuff had taken place on the property that wasn't covered by grass.
Right.
That we were able to make out from those photos.
So on Patrick Scott's property, on his driveway, was an enclosed garage. That was an area that we thought potentially he could have stored her because it was closed. Nobody had access to it other than Patrick, conceivably. Now, after we put divers in the pond, when we drove by, we noticed that Patrick was taking apart his garage. He was removing the siding and the panels for the garage. And the neighbors had told us that he had started doing that in the middle of the night one day. And he wasn't just removing the plywood from the garage, he was burning it. So it seemed like odd behavior,
Right.
especially to start doing it a day or two after we searched a pond with divers behind his house. And it seemed likely that he was doing it to potentially destroy evidence. So we knew we needed to start moving quickly.
Right.
So once we got the photographs back from the aircraft that showed numerous locations where there was ground disturbance and likely had been digging recently, that's when we started to formulate our plan to get onto Patrick's property and do a very detailed, methodical search of the entire property and potentially dig on it.
Keep in mind that the day after he left and went to the cemetery an hour earlier in Johnson County. And in this time frame, we also got a tip that said that Patrick had possibly buried Valerie at that cemetery. We had received that tip. So we had to keep in mind the cemetery as well as the 2 properties that he owned in Rush County as well, the cemetery in Johnson County.
Right.
We ended up going a day or two later to the cemetery to check it out. It's a small cemetery, but directly behind it was a wooded area and a stream that flowed through it. And so we had to start thinking, how are we going to search a cemetery for a dead body? That's going to require some thought. Based on that information, the aerial photography, we all kind of got together and decided to come up with a plan to make our next big move on this investigation. And that next move was to serve Patrick with a search warrant to dig up his property and potentially do the same at the cemetery.
Right.
And so this was going to involve 2 federal agencies and then Rushfield PD and Rush County Sheriffs. So there was an immense amount of planning that needed to be done. FBI was going to bring 50 personnel down to conduct evidence collection and potentially help us dig. They were also going to provide some specialty equipment, ground penetrating radar. They had their own cadaver dogs that they utilized. Rush County was going to provide some excavators to assist with the digging.
Planning we took 3 weeks. 3 weeks for us to plan, type search warrants.
It's November at this point, so it's starting to get cold.
Ground's getting hard.
Ground's getting hard. At this point, Patrick had completely torn down his garage. The only thing that remained was the frame of it. We were coming up on the holiday, and we decided we should probably do it the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. So we had enough people back in the area. So we met, we did our brief, And I think around 6 a.m, rolled out to Patrick Scott's house. The whole family was home. Patrick was getting ready to go to work or something. We were able to make contact with him before we left. We notified him of our intent down there, read him the search warrants, and told him everything we were about to do, and gave him the opportunity to let us know anything that he wanted us to know. And in typical Patrick Scott fashion, he couldn't care less. Cooperative, said, that's fine. Do I need to be here? Can I stay? I think that's what he said. He said, can I stay? And we said, no. We're going to have your house. You can't go back in it at this point.
Right. That would have been the moment that he would have shown some fear.
You'd think.
Yeah.
We're there now.
Right.
And
with an excavator.
With an excavator, and we're telling you we're digging your yard up.
Well, and keep in mind, we brought as many personnel that the population of Arlington has. So we filled the whole section of that town with personnel covered in law enforcement gear and everything. And he'd carry on conversations with us like, again, we're like, he's just talking to a buddy on the street, and there was no nervousness, no apprehension, and anything we needed, let us walk right in his house with no resistance at all. And just normal Patrick Scott on that day.
Of course, this garners media attention because there's enough vehicles parked to completely block off all of Arlington. The media starts showing up as soon as the sun came up.
Which, by the way, I did go to the family's house prior to our arrival and inform them that we were going to be doing this, so it wasn't a shock to them.
Right.
And to expect that people would probably knock on their doors. So they were aware before we showed up.
And that was important too, because we didn't want everybody knowing about this before it happened. In fact, we didn't want anybody to know about it until we got there. And so that's why we decided to wait until we were driving up there and tell them in person rather than tell them beforehand. The first thing that happened, the FBI went through and began photographing everything.
Well, and the logistics of this undertaking there was so much to it, and there were so many little things you had to think about. Just thinking about, we had to have the property marked because we're about to excavate it. So we can't dig with electric lines and everything else out there. So, if you call those companies to come mark it, they're going to mark it 24 to 48 hours in advance. So we had to line up just those little things. There was so many logistics to this that we had to have in place. That it did all fall in place that day. They showed up right after we got there, marked the property, things like that we just had to have in place.
Right.
That just worked out that day.
So I think as they were taking photographs, I think the cadaver dogs started and searched the property, searched the house, even went through the vehicles, and did not indicate. And then again,
that's the highs and lows of this investigation.
Right.
The high is that we're there, and the first thing we get is that we don't get a positive indication from a...
We thought for sure, right? The FBI is bringing their certified canine.
Right.
This guy is going to tell us right where it is.
Right.
Nothing. And I think the handler went over every spot at least twice.
Yeah, he did a really good job. He covered a lot of area and did a really good job.
Then we put our electronic sniffing canine through. Goes through the house, searches. There were so many electronics in that house that it just became too much.
Right.
The dog did an amazing job. The handler did an amazing job. They searched. They didn't find anything in the house other than what we already knew about.
Right.
The handler actually decided on his own to just kind of take the dog around the property. And that's when we find out the dog had indicated on a pile of rubble. Now, Patrick Scott has his house. Then there's a neighbor's house.
Right.
And then next to that neighbor is a lot where another house had been, but it had been demolished, and it was just an empty lot. Patrick owned that empty lot and had outbuildings on there, so sheds. Okay, he also had a burn pit and a...
like debris.
Yeah, just a bunch of debris.
Everything you need to get rid of evidence.
Wood chipper.
Right.
Yeah, he had a wood chipper, which again, we discussed with the FBI, how do we search that?
Right.
So we had a plan for that. Electronic sniffing canine was on that piece of property where the outbuildings were, next to a pile of rubble near the burn pit, where it found a phone under some rubble that had been crushed. So we end up taking that phone and later determined that it was not Valerie's main phone, but it was another phone that she had had.
Mm-hmm.
The phone was smashed to bits. We found that phone, and it was right next to one of the areas of ground disturbance that had been marked. So we decided, well, let's start here.
Right.
If he's disposing of things here, maybe there's something else that we can unearth.
Right.
And I think within about 5 minutes of digging, we see this corner, a wooden box, just the corner sticking out of the ground. And we slowly start to dig it out and realize it's 2x4s and OSB plywood.
I mean, this has got to be an extraordinary moment.
Huge.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is it.
This is it.
We know he built a box out of these materials.
Right.
It's buried in his backyard.
Right.
It's a bit odd. So
Mission accomplished.
that's it. So everyone comes around and we start digging this out slowly. And it ends up being probably a 5.5 foot long box. I mean, it was a coffin, a home built coffin.
Right.
So we pull it up
Covered. It's got tarp. It's got everything. I mean, it's wrapped.
and we decide, let's open this. Crack open the top. And everyone peers in. Nothing but trash. It's a box with some old documents and VHS tapes. And we think, what is this?
What possible reason could you come up with as to why he would bury his garbage in a coffin?
Again, that's we're back to the low. Our first thought at that point right there was he moved her.
Yeah.
Like, she had been in that box, but he moved her.
Right.
Put her in a box, threw it in his trailer, and got her off somewhere.
Right.
Buried her, and then disposed of the box in his yard.
Which led us back to the cemetery in Johnson County. You know, the next morning early, getting there. I can't say we were 100% sure how we were going to handle the cemetery at that point even. We were trying to determine, you know, we're going to put dog out there. We're still trying to determine how we are going to handle the cemetery that is full of dead bodies. So we weren't really sure then what we were going to do even, but so Tom left to go over to that. The guys who had dug that spot, who had been there digging that spot that day, those guys stayed there the whole time, and they kept digging. And we had called in Bruce Davis from Rush County, and he was we had deputized him prior, and he was owns a wrecker service here, and he came in to do our excavator for us. And he brought his excavator in, and Bruce kept digging where they told him to dig in that spot. And I had walked away at this point and went back in the house and was helping them search in the house. And Bruce kept digging, and one thing Bruce kept saying was, my excavator is in virgin soil. This soil has been moved. Now, it looked fine. It didn't look like that, but he said it's not struggling. The hoist isn't struggling to move it. At some point in time, somebody has dug this section up. So Bruce said, I'm going to keep digging, and the officers were still there with him as he was doing it. I'm in the house, and Clay Ratliff from our department, he's a sergeant, calls me on my phone. He says, hey, I just want to let you know, we think we've hit another box way down in the ground, and we're starting to get a smell.
Right. Oh, okay.
And he said, I'm not trying to get, I know we've already had a high today. I'm not trying to get you there. And so when I walked over, by the time I got over there, I could see just the corner of the box. I could see a corner of another box. And as soon as I walked up, I could start smelling decomposition. I mean, once you have that smell in your nose, you'll never forget it. And so then I called Tom, and I said, Tom had just got to Johnson County, so 2 counties away, and I said, hey, you got to come back. We found another box. And so that's when we started the painstaking excavation of that box. That was obviously, it was a long process, hand shoveling that box out at that point.
Randy calls me and says, hey, don't want to get your hopes up, but we may have something.
Right.
So we had the cadaver dogs at the cemetery, and I said, hey, guys, start doing your sweep here. I got to go. And I hauled it all the way back.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I got there, the box was still underground, and it was just this process of slowly removing it. Because nobody wanted to say it at that point, but everybody knew what was inside that box. And nobody wanted to get their hopes up. But
right.
Like Randy said, if you've ever smelled that before, you know exactly what it is.
Right.
So we end up slowly digging by hand around this box and get it all unearthed and begin the process of moving it up to the surface so we have an area to work with it. This box was in much better shape than the first box. And this box was made in a very meticulous way. It was perfect. All you could see was a tarp on the outside of the box that had been taped several times. Once we got it out, the FBI's evidence collection team got set up to actually open it. But once they started removing the outer layer, so it was a tarp that had been duct taped.
Right.
Underneath the tarp was like a plastic bag that had been wrapped around it multiple times, like a plastic sheet sealing it.
Right.
When that was removed, you could see this well-built box, and all the seams around it had been taped with duct tape multiple times. Now, again, the excavator had cracked the lid on it, and so you could see inside. And inside, what you could see were black garbage bags. So obviously somebody was trying to keep something inside of this box. The box was held together with like deck screws, which are like those hex screws, right? And now the FBI had a toolkit, but they didn't have the bit to unscrew those screws.
Right.
Because there's a particular brand. And I think Randy and I turned to each other and we're kind of like, I bet we know where we can find that bit. And somebody went into Patrick's garage, and attached to the DeWalt drill was the bit that fit that box. Mm-hmm. So we used his drill to open it. Inside was, well, I think what we could easily say was a body wrapped in black garbage bags.
Right.
And taped.
It was meant to be that we found Valerie that day. Those guys had dug that spot for a long time. We said, we're done. We're good to go. Right. And Bruce Davis, who was running the excavator, said, I have one more pull left, and I'm maxed on my excavator. He said, I'm going to use it. And that is when the corner tooth of his excavator bucket touched or caught the corner box.
Right.
That was the last pull. That's all he had left.
Wow.
And we were done with that spot. It was meant to be that we found her that day at that time.
Mm-hmm. Were you guys able to ID her?
We were confident it was her at that time. We were able to take her social media photo that she had, that last image of her that day that she had sent on Snapchat on June 7th, had her hand in the reflection, and we were able to see bright orange fingernails. And
which was the first thing we seen when we opened up the black plastic that body was wrapped in. Was the fingernails.
First thing you see.
Wow.
We met in the command post, and all the investigators sat down, and we made the determination there that Patrick Scott was going to be arrested for Valerie Tyndall's murder that day. And we had a surveillance team on him who had been monitoring him the whole time for us in Shelby County. They took him into custody shortly later without incident. And we get there, and we tell Patrick that he's coming with us. We load him in my vehicle, and we have roughly a 40-minute drive back to our office. Mm-hmm. And in pretty well silence. I mean, he doesn't say a word, doesn't say, hey, what's going on?
Has he been Mirandized at this point?
Not at this point, no.
Okay.
I don't think anything was said to him,
right,
other than he was under arrest.
Right.
And, I mean, you could tell he knew.
Right.
He knew what had happened.
Right. So you're taking him in now for a formal custodial interview.
Yes, on the murder of Valerie, not the, assisting or anything.
Right.
We take him back, and I'm going to do the interview with him. We had a good case. We knew Patrick Scott was going to be found guilty. We knew we were going to win that case. But for us, we knew we had to know that day. We had lived this for that long. The family had lived that for that long, and we had to know that day.
Right.
And so walking in, I went all different directions on how I'm going to do this interview, and I decided just to go opposite of what, every other interview was that he had went through, and decided to try it. And thankfully it worked. We put him in the interview room, and he ends up being willing to answer questions. And I lay out the entire case to him, what we have, what we've done. I lay out pretty much the entire case before I ever advise him of his rights. So he knows every aspect of the case we have. And I mean, to be honest with you, I think we had all talked. We didn't think he would. We did not expect a confession that day. Mm-hmm. We needed it. We hoped for it. But going in, knowing how Patrick had been the whole time, it wasn't something we expected that day. We kind of had already had it in our head that it was unlikely. And I know a lot of people probably would sit back and say, with all this evidence, how's he not going to confess? Well, this guy has lied about everything all the way through. He's believable. He's good. He's not your traditional person or criminal.
Not to mention, like, that hour drive back where he was that's the only time he's ever been like that, just dead silent. I mean, it was like a complete personality shift.
Right.
Once he knew we knew.
Right.
So at that point, it was kind of like, all bets are off. We don't know who this guy is.
Right.
And we even called him when we found the first box and said, hey,
right.
found a box.
Right.
We're going to find another? No.
And did he say, by the way, why he had buried garbage?
A lot of the VHS tapes were vintage porn,
Uh-huh.
and he did not want his wife to find them. is what he told us.
Okay.
A bit of overkill, I'd say,
Yeah.
to build a coffin to put 12 VHS tapes in.
Do you think that perhaps he buried that as a decoy?
Yes. I mean, that's
In case somebody found one, they would say, "Oh, well, you don't usually find
2 boxes.
another,
Yeah,
so
right.
you found one."
We've had a whole bunch of theories of what we think the second box was, whether it's a decoy. We've also thought
Right.
that it wasn't as well, like Tom said, the box that Valerie was in was very well constructed.
Right.
This one was not as well constructed.
Right.
The corners weren't perfect. It wasn't.
And he was so meticulous in everything he did. In the course of our investigation, what we saw from him was
Right.
like things had to be perfect.
Right. Okay. So I've seen the interview. You're extremely direct. You try several different tactics as you're kind of going along, from direct to sympathetic to, you're very encouraging. And at some point you strike the right chord and you get what you have actually been hoping for. And we have that. So let's play that right now.
What happened to Valerie?
Valerie got carried away.
Doing what?
Huh?
Doing what?
Doing what?
Mm-hmm. Just lay it out to me. Lay it out to me. What happened to her?
She tried to blackmail me into buying her a car.
Okay. And what happened?
She thought she was going to seduce me and it wasn't going to happen. Things just got carried away.
Well, explain that to me. What's that mean? Does Linda know about it?
Nope.
Okay.
Nobody knows.
It's your chance to tell me what happened.
She tried to seduce me and I wasn't going to have it.
But what happened to Valerie? That's where you're stopping.
What'd
you do to her?
What'd I do to her?
What'd you do to her? Tell us what you did to her.
Strangled her.
With what?
A belt.
Okay. And then what'd you do with it?
I moved her into the office
Okay. How long was she in there?
till the next day.
Okay.
And were you guys watching in another room?
Yeah. So he had a feed into his office and we were sitting around watching the interview happen live.
Does it seem to you like Patrick Scott is of a mindset where he is going to confess, do you think?
Honestly, I don't think we knew until the words "I strangled her" came out of his mouth.
Right.
Up until that second, because Randy was right. He kept stopping short of what happened to Valerie.
Right.
He would give a little bit, but he didn't take that extra step. And it was kind of, is he going to? And it wasn't until he said, "I strangled her," that I was like, there it is.
I don't know how to describe it because you got at least some closure in a long investigation. You now know what happened at the time, but still you've got a 17-year-old that was killed. It's so surreal at that moment when he makes he says those words. For me, it was one of the weirder feelings of my career to be in that moment of
Right.
such a long time dedicated to it, to have that moment happen. So
Absolutely. And that's, another thing that we didn't discuss here really is, this investigation became a very big part of all our lives. It was constant.
Day and night.
And that's, Randy and I talked about how we would wake up multiple times in the middle of the night and roll over and take notes or email ourselves something to look in. Oh, I forgot about this.
Right.
There were nights that I would get up, go downstairs, pull out my laptop at 2 a.m. and look up some portion of evidence we had.
Right.
So, this was a very consuming investigation from the start.
I can see where it wouldn't be joy and adulation, but was it relief? Was it a big sigh of relief that this is, you got this,
I would say
and
it's fair.
she's going to get justice and he's never going to see the light of day?
I think that's fair. Like I said, we knew the case was solid. We knew the case was good without it, but we had to know that day. I just felt that day we had to know.
Right.
It was almost like we knew everything except where she was. Then we found her. And the last question was, what transpired here?
Right. And here's the big question. Why? Why do you think he confessed?
No.
I don't believe it was all the evidence caused him to confess. I don't think he's that type of person.
No. And we've discussed numerous times different possibilities as to why. We have no hard facts. There's no evidence pointing to anything. All we have is what he said, which I don't believe.
Was he worried about the rest of his family?
So the way he lays it out in that interview where he confesses, what he is saying is that she was going to tell everybody that he was trying to seduce her.
Right.
And he was basically saying he wasn't, so his only option was to kill her.
Right.
Which just doesn't make any sense. Doesn't add up at all.
Right. But do you think he confessed because he was worried about his wife and a daughter who lived on the property and no one knew what their role in it was?
I think there's probably an aspect of it that lends to that. I think this was, I mean, he murdered a 17-year-old girl.
Right.
In cold blood. He strangled her. He watched her die. He kept her body in his house where he ate dinner with his family and then disposed of her in his backyard. You know, you have to think this weighed on him to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe like Randy offered him that opportunity, maybe that's what he was looking for.
Right.
I don't, the thing is, we'll never really know.
Right.
No, his mind, I mean, he went about his day. I mean, he killed a 17-year-old girl. He strangled her, stored her in an office, and then took his family out to eat that night at a pizza place.
Right.
You know, wearing the belt that he strangled her with.
And he was very matter of fact about it. I mean, you asked him, you know, how do you feel? Like, this is the big opportunity. Where are you going to break down? Are you going to feel? And he goes, well, I wasn't crazy about it. And you're like, are you a bona fide sociopath?
Right. Right. And honestly, that may be, right? I think he's worth a study.
His ability to dissociate what his actions were is unbelievable. And as you watch him and his ability to lie and have believable lies and then come up with the supporting details to his lies on the spot, and then the fact that he can kill a girl, go about his life like nothing ever happened, and continue to live it is just unbelievable. And his ability to dissociate is like, I have never seen before, and hopefully I never see again.
Right.
And I mean, you see him on the surveillance footage at Home Depot that next day purchasing wood, just same old Patrick Scott that we talk to every single day.
Right.
He did the act, and then almost as if as soon as it was over, it was over. It was gone. He forgot about it and moved on.
And he didn't go to trial, which is probably the right move given the mountain of evidence against him. And he decided to take a plea deal. And what did he get?
He got 57 years, which was a really good plea. The max sentence on this case was 65 years. So 57 was a really good plea to sign. But in the sentencing guidelines, again, his max would have been 65. Advisory in Indiana is 55. So he got 57 years over it.
He just had his birthday and turned 59. So is it safe to say he will never, ever see the light of day again?
Yeah, it's safe to say. Yeah, he'll die in prison.
Well, for anyone who thinks, you know, this should be wrapped up in the span of, you know, one TV episode, you can see the painstaking amount of work that goes into this. You know, how you guys persevered through all of this because you really didn't have a lot to go on for so long. And then even when there was something that presented itself, it usually didn't lead anywhere. This is an incredible 5-month investigation that, obviously absolutely consumed you and several other agencies. Thank you for getting justice for Valerie Tyndall. Also, let me thank Senior Inspector Tom Abreu from the U.S. Marshals Great Lakes Regional Fugitive Task Force and Detectives Randy Meek and Sean Smallwood of the Rush County Sheriff's Office.
Thanks for having us.
And if you have a moment, this is the part I ask you to please go to Apple or Spotify and give us a 5-star rating and write a glowing review. And, of course, tell your friends about us. It's pretty unusual to have a podcast where you're hearing from the people in law enforcement who are at the tip of the spear. We're just trying to grow this thing so we could really use your help. So thanks very much in advance. And finally, Chasing Evil is produced with the cooperation of the U.S. Marshals Service. It contains interviews with current and retired employees, as well as other persons. Opinions, positions, and views expressed by any of them may not reflect the official views, positions, or policies of the United States Marshals Service. Stay safe, everyone.